Good morning. Good morning. I think I'm live. I'm reading out of Scarlet Feather. It is a book by Joan Grant. It's a far memory book. Joan Grant was born in 1907 and she was educated largely by Governesses, and her father was a very interesting man as well, very intelligent, and this book is about a tribe. Joan Grant writes books from her far memory, and this is the story of Raki and Piyanah. They're born as outcasts into an American Indian tribe many thousands of years ago, somewhere in the West. But they are outcasts only because Piyanah's mother, who raises them both, is strong enough to defy tribal customs. So Piyanah's mother has passed away, and she and Raki, who is her cousin, are the best of mates. We are now coming onto a chapter called The Little Valley. The moon was up when we crept out of the teepee, and weaving shadows from the watchfire patterned the black and white of the open space we had to cross before reaching the shelter of the trees. Thin snow crunched underfoot. Across the valley, a wild dog began to bark, and another took up the challenge. It was very cold, but Raki's hand was warm and secure. I wondered if the big grizzly whose spoor we had seen 2 days earlier had gone back to the high ground or was lurking near us in the darkness. I heard a thud, and I thought it must have been caused by some large animal, but Raki said it was only falling snow off an overloaded branch. Except where the trees grew closer together, the track was easy to follow in the brilliant moonlight. Yet it seemed longer than I expected, because before we reached the place where we had hidden our bundles the previous day. We had bread, enough for 3 days, strips of pemmican, a bow with 4 extra bowstrings, fish hooks, line, a rope of plaited rawhide, 2 knives, and a small tomahawk. These were divided equally between us, but Raki carried 2 water skins, one empty and the other full of seed maize, and a small cooking pot. We each wore a second tunic and a blanket, and carried a spare pair of moccasins in our belt. I was glad that Raki had let me bring only the things he considered essential, for the thongs of my pack soon began to chafe my shoulders. It was moonset when we reached the edge of the forest. We had to wait until the thin grey light brought the ground out of the shadows, and it was safe to go on. We heard the roar of the water before we came in sight of the river, so I knew I could no longer cling to the hope that we should be able to cross on the ice lower down the valley. Raki knew what I was thinking, for he said confidently, "It's not really a very difficult climb. You've done harder ones for no particular reason except that they were an adventure. This is an adventure above all the others, so you are sure to be steadier even than usual. Now we are our own tribe. The great hunters will give us counsel. They always do to chiefs." "I am not frightened," I said firmly, "not even right down inside of me." "Of course you're not, but it's easier to climb when your hands are warm. Give them to me and I'll thaw them." He pulled open the neck of his tunic and held my hands against his chest until my fingers were supple. Then he said briskly, "Now, before we have time to think about it anymore, would you like me to lower you down this first bit until you can stand on the ledge?" I was afraid having to watch him do the climb, for if he fell, I might not be able to get down to him. He knew it, otherwise he would have gone first, as he always did. "I'll go now while my hands are warm," I said. "Take off your pack. I'll lower them down both afterwards." He lay face down and I lay face down and slid my feet over the edge of the cliff. The spray of the rapids far below reached me, fine as mist. Raki was lying flat, holding my wrists. "Go slowly. You will feel the first ledge in a moment. The rock is honest. I tested it yesterday." I couldn't find the ledge and felt my fingers slipping from their hold. I nearly shouted to Raki to let go my wrist, for I thought I should pull him over me. Then my foot found something to take my weight. "It's all right, Raki. I can stand now." Edge along 3 paces to the right. Then stretch out your hand until you feel a thorn bush. Its roots are quite firm. He let go of my wrist. I felt as though the dark waters below were trying to pull me backwards by the hair. Flattened against the rock, I groped sideways, afraid that the narrow ledge was going to crumble before I could find a foothold. I reached the thorn bush and swung by it to the other ledge. His voice steadied me. "There's a fissure in the rock, a little farther on. Follow that down till you come to a broad shelf. Wait there till I join you." I heard the packs pumping against the rock face as he lowered them down, then the thud of the coiled rope as he dropped it after them. The spray was swirling up from the floor, like steam from a cooking pot. My hair was grey with damp, and I blew on the fingers of the hand I was not using to hold on with, to make them warm enough to be obedient. As Raki climbed down, I tried not to think of what would happen if he slipped. Then he was beside me, saying, "It isn't a difficult climb, really, is it, Piyanah? It's only that it looks difficult from the top. No one will think that we came this way. And even if they can follow our tracks so far, they will think we must have turned back to try to cross the river at the ford higher up. Or if they follow this bank, they reach the marsh. They will know that they have lost us when they find no tracks there. If the ice hadn't broken, we might have crossed almost anywhere, so they would have to search the whole of the far bank. But now, when they find no sign of us beyond the ford, they might not try anywhere else. I expect they will believe we have been drowned. It's worth 3 days' start, the ice breaking." I tried to thank the ice spirit for bringing the thaw before we had crossed, but thought it would be easier to be properly grateful when we had reached the far bank. "I'll go first this time," said Raki. "Slide over the edge when I tell you. I'll put your foot in a safe hold. It is rather difficult to find unless you know where it is." The rest of the climb down was easier than I had expected, but I knew Raki was nearly as relieved as I was when we reached the foot of the cliff. We tied on our packs and Raki wound the rope around his waist. I was used to balancing on slippery rocks above a torrent, for we often did it when spearing fish. The ice was moving faster now, and the slabs grinding together sounded like skeletons being gnawed by great cougar. The noise was too loud for us to hear our voices, but we could see each other laughing, and there was no longer fear behind the laughter. From boulder to boulder we jumped or scrambled, sometimes creeping forward on hands and knees, sometimes poised for a leap over racing water. The sun had cleared the mist before we reached the far bank. We spread our dripping clothes over a bush, and ran around naked in the sun till the air only felt sharp and clean, like cold water when you are thirsty, instead of being an enemy with arrows of ice. We ate some bread. There was no time to make a fire, even if we had caught fish to cook in it. Spring had come before the day of spring, and all round us we could hear earth stirring into life. From the forest we heard snow crashing from the branches as trees held up their arms to the sun. Even when we struck north, away from the river, the sound of running water was with us, for each melting drift added its note to the spring chorus. There was heat in the sun now, and it was good to walk naked and forget that the night would be cold. We decided not to make a fire until we were certain that its smoke would not betray us. Perhaps it would be safe after dark if we could find somewhere to hide the light. We came to a small stream which was running freely and walked through the shallow water for a long time, further to hide our trail. The country between us and the hills was flat and stony. There were no trees, for only stunted bushes could nourish themselves in the sandy ground. We had expected to be able to make a shelter out of branches, but there was not even a rock high enough to keep off the night wind. Winter crept back with the lengthening shadows. We put on our tunics and thought of the fur robe, which had been too bulky to carry. By moonrise it would be bitterly cold. We were hungry enough to have eaten raw fish, but couldn't see any in the stream. I helped Raki to snare over a gopher hold, though it didn't look very promising as there were no fresh droppings near it. A sullen wind began to blow from the north. It raised the sand in little eddies and disturbed the dry twigs of the huddled bushes. Long ago the stream must have been much larger, for now it threaded its way through a bed wide enough for a river. Beside it we were hidden from anyone who was not standing directly above us, and Raki warned to risk making a fire. But I was more afraid of being taken back to the encampment than of the cold. I wondered if we should ever live in a community again, ever be part of a life which went on in the same pattern each day after day. If only Father had not been so cruel, it would have been pleasant to see the old woman stirring cauldrons and the elder smoking, remote and sombre, by the watchfire. Even a bear needs the security of her den, and the beaver her fastness under the bank. But Raki and I did not need a teepee or people or familiar things. We only needed each other. To be apart would be a coldness which no fire could warm, and a hunger which even deer stew could not satisfy. "Piyanah," he said, "we must dig a hole to sleep in. The bank is loose enough to pull down with our hands. Pile the earth on the windward side." It was nearly nightfall before we finished. The sky was green as ice, and the wind dark as a crow's wing. We huddled together like cubs whose mother had gone hunting, and I could hear the long, steady beat of his heart. "When we return into the sky, Piyanah, men will see one new star instead of two. The brightest stars are two people who have loved each other. They will make us into their tribe. They will take us into their tribe. It is a greater tribe than follows the prioress Lord of Feathers, and its brotherhood is closer than blood tie." "Nothing else matters except being together, does it, Raki?" "Nothing else mattered," said Raki. It took us 2 days to reach the mountains beyond the plain, and another to find the path by which we crossed them. On the northern side the foothills folded into narrow valleys, each separated by a sharp ridge, and it was one of these that we found our place of the corn growing. A stream leapt down 5 falls and then sang through a meadow, a gentle slope of about 200 paces, enclosed by wooden slopes which grew together beyond it, so that the water flowed down into the open country through a narrow cleft. Instead of a teepee, we made a shelter against the face of a steep rock. 3 small trees growing close together made the uprights, and between them we put closely interwoven branches until it was secure against wind and rain. Beside it there was a great pine with twin trunks, and this became our totem. Every day we put flowers at its foot to remind the tree spirit to look after us. Windrushes grew in the bed of the stream. From their stalks we made covering for the floor, and a heap of the dry leaves was warm to sleep in. After Raki had made a trap below the largest pool, we had plenty of fish, and in the woods we found several kinds of plants which we knew were good to eat. There was a colony of gophers lower down the hillside, and I thought I hated to kill them. We had to set snares, because their flesh was useful for a stew, and we needed the skins to make a curtain to close the entrance to our shelter. He carved me a needle out of a chipmunk bone, but it was difficult to sew the skins together without deer sinew, for the gut of small animals is brittle unless it has been treated with oil or bear grease. It took us nearly a moon to prepare a plot of ground, for through the soil was dark and rich. It was difficult to get it ready for the sowing without any proper tools, but soon we could watch the green shoots of our corn getting taller and stronger every day. Though we made several expeditions into the uninhabited country, we couldn't find any salt, and often wished that we had remembered to bring some with us. Sage and garlic helped to make our stews more interesting, but it was always exciting when we found something that was a change from fish or gophers. Occasionally Raki got wildfowl from a lake about 3 hours running distance from our little valley, and several times he caught a porcupine. which we wrapped in clay and baked in hot ashes, until the day clay was so hard it could only be broken with a heavy stone, and the quills came off with it. The best find of all was a hollow tree full of honeycomb. I got badly stung taking this, but there was enough to fill 4 jars, which we had baked from red clay at the same time as we made our food bowls. I was lying on the bank of the stream, enjoying the feel of the grass, warm and alive against my skin, when Raki plaited a rope from strips of rawhide, which had been part of the deer he had killed a moon earlier. The flesh we had made into pemmican, and the sinews I was keeping to sew winter tonics and moccasins. As I watched him, I wished that I could draw his face, so that people in the future would know the color of his thoughts. The pictures we had seen in the cave were only a few scrawls of red chalk, and yet the bison were so alive that I could almost feel the ground shudder under their thudding hooves. I should draw Raki's nose and forehead in a single line. The shadows under the cheekbone will be difficult, and the listening stillness of the eyebrow. He leaned down. The straight black hair swung forward and hid his face, and I got up to push the log nearer to the center of the fire, whose heat was soaking down through the sand to a teal wrapped in leaves and clay. Then I remembered the water jar was empty. There had been very little rain, and now that the flow over the rocks was only sufficient to keep them glistening with moisture, we drew our water in the shade of a rock that guarded the pool below the meadow. As I bent down over the water, my reflection stretched out her hands to me, and I smiled at her. The polished surface rippled, though there was no breeze. I thought, if Nonna saw this, she would say my spirit was in danger. The water was smooth again. Suddenly, I realized that what I am now seeing was more than my own reflection. The girl was like me, yet older, and she wore the feathered headdress. The lips moved, and I thought I could not hear her voice. I knew what she was saying. You must follow the way of the feathers. You cannot hide from them, Piyanah, for you are only the girl I used to be. You were born to the feathers, though you cannot see them. They're part of you, as the pinions of an eagle are in the unhatched egg. The pool quivered as the water in a cooking pot trembles with the heat. I saw my own face looking up at me, with fear in the eyes. Clearer than the call of the blue jay in the trees above me, I seemed to hear my father's voice. You cannot escape the future, for with the past it is the other half of the present. They are 2 wings by which the bird of the spirits flies to the land without shadows. I answered him as though he were standing beside me. Raki and I are not bound by the past. We are children of the present, and the future is our own. We are secure because we are together. We are bound by no tribal laws. We are free to live. Why should your ambition bring down our swift joy like a roped bison? In the listening silence, it seemed that all the things I had ever feared come out of the shadows of the trees to watch me. The sunlight had grown cold, and the stream was weary as slow tears. I heard Raki calling me, shouting that he had found a wild duck in a snare, so that tomorrow we should have a feast like the chief of 7 tribes. As I ran towards him, the thoughts which had come to haunt me slid away behind the barriers I had built against them. There was no longer a cloud over my son. Raki's hand was on my shoulder, and he was laughing down at me. I wanted to tell him about the ghost in the pond, but the memory of how my father had nearly taken him away from me made me afraid. Hidden in my mind was the fear that something even stronger than the love between us would call him back, for I knew that if he had heard the voice as I had heard it, we would be setting out to cross the pass, every step bringing us nearer to the desert of 7 years, which we must travel alone. A few days later, I was standing on a rock waiting to spear a fish when again I saw the water tremble. For the flash of a dragonfly, I saw the woman, then flung my spear at her so that she was hidden by the spreading ripples. I told myself she was not Piyanah of the future. She was only a dream of my father's. looking up through the water in search of a mortal who would give her breath. Yet I found myself speaking to her as though she were a real person. Poor Piyanah of the feathers, you will never be born, because I, Piyanah, who is 11 years old, am stronger than you. You and your feathers belong to the land of dreams, and you will never be able to take me to fulfill your destiny. You can't understand me because you're only a legend. I belong to the firm earth where trees are rooted, and I can hear Raki laughing. After that day I filled the water jar only when there was a flow, for I dared not look into still water. It was the first time I had ever concealed something from Raki. I knew in my heart that he wanted to bring the before people alive. He was like a carver who sees a totem pole hidden in a tree, calling to him to release it with his knife. He had seen the old truth hidden in the past, and he wanted us to bear it into the present, even though we walked as mourners under the burden. So this was the 7th chapter, I think it was. These are not numbered, called The Little Valley, and the next one is called Dark Smoke. Have a lovely Wednesday.